We've got to be careful about the balance of these fats, but they have a number of positive benefits. Limited for time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but the advice to cut down on our fats is not only going to cut down on the calories, and we've heard maybe not even help our obesity, but it is going to reduce our intake of essential omega-3 fatty acids. This, if I can find this N-3 that I put up on the slides here is the sign for omega-3 fats. We don't have enough omega-3 fats in our diet, which is why we're advised to eat oily fish. It's better to think about the composition of fat that we take in our diet, so not reduce it, but change the composition of that fat. And hopefully some of the things I'm going to talk about will give us some guidelines how to do that. Western diets have far too much omega-6 fatty acids, and it's all down to the position of these double bonds on these carbon chains. Ideally, we want between 2 and 4 grams or parts of omega-6 fat to 1 of omega-3. Western diets dominated by corn oil, soya oil, have far too much omega-6, and that impairs our metabolism of the omega-3 fats. It actually increases the need for the long-chain omega-3 fats. I don't want to dwell too long on this biochemistry, but on the left-hand side of the chart is the biochemical changes that undergo in our body and the animals, converting relatively short, long omega-3 fats into the long-chain omega-3, the DHA, the EPA, the fats that we're encouraged to eat in oily fish. On the right-hand side here is the similar metabolic pathway for omega-6 fats, and they share the same enzyme systems, which is why if we overdose on omega-6 fats, our body can't convert the plant-based and the relatively short omega-3 fats into the long chain. So that's why we need to eat oily fish and increase our intake of these fats, because we have too much omega-6 in our diet. And the health risks from overdosing on omega-6 fats are not particularly well known. So we touched on saturated fats, and even that is being questioned now. But if we have an excess of omega-6 fats in our diet, we can't do this conversion where we're getting these long-chain omega-3 fats, which is why we're encouraged to eat oily fish. Most guidelines around the world recommend between 200 to 450 milligrams of these long-chain omega-3 fats, which are in theory not essential, but our bodies can't convert the shorter acid into those ones, into the long-chain omega-3. So that's why we're advised to eat oily fish, but not enough of the population do, and it's maybe questionable the sustainability of fishing our oceans, depleting reserves. How else can we get these long-chain omega-3? An alternative source is lean, grass-fed meat, particularly beef and lamb. Another fatty acid I want to touch on is conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA. It's part of a relatively big group, and our only source of these in our diet, which have a number of health benefits, is from ruminant products, milk and meat from ruminants. If we think about trying to explain the comment that Zoe made that milk is really high in saturated fats, although ruminants evolved to eat on forage-based diets, and forage-based diets, although they're low in fat, most of that fat is actually omega-3 fatty acids, alpha-linolenic acid. So they're eating a diet that's quite high in unsaturated fat. I'll come back to that in a minute. But because of the bugs in the rumen that allow the cattle to graze the grass and utilize the forage, they actually destroy a lot of the unsaturated fats in the cow's diet and convert it into saturated fatty acids, which is why most ruminant products have a lot of omega-6 fats in them. In contrast to the forage, our grain-based diet, so the soya and the barley and the wheat that we might feed to animals in shed, they're going to be high in omega-6 fats. So maybe not surprising later if I get round to talking about differences that we see, that pasture-fed meat is higher in omega-3, grain-fed meat is higher in omega-6. The amount of polyunsaturated fats that escapes being destroyed in the rumen depends how long it stays in the rumen. It's not an exact science. There's various factors that will influence the fatty acid profile in the milk or the meat. And these are just, at the bottom here, some of the factors. How much polyunsaturated fats and what PUFAs are the animals eating? How long does it stay in the rumen? And what goes on in the rest of their metabolism. As I touched on, there's a lot of evidence that pasture-fed or milk and meat is actually better for our health. It's a better balance of nutrients. I must admit, it was only after I put this slide in, I pinched it off the internet reference at the bottom there, that I thought, oh, maybe the fact that this is it's got 8 tiles on this Scrabble board might question the evidence when you're only allowed seven tiles. But that hopefully the evidence that I put up will have a lot more validity than that. Start off with milk, and this is a study that was published in February this year, relatively new study, looking at the fatty acid composition in the diet. What I've got on this chart here is the ratio of omega-6 fats to omega-3 fats, bearing in mind I want our target for our total diet to be somewhere between 2 and 4, no more than that. And you can see conventional milk is way above that. This is an American study where we've got 5 parts of omega-6 fatty acid to 1 of omega-3 in conventional milk. Much better, we've come down within our target range for organic milk, but the pasture-fed is actually has more omega-3 fatty acid in it than it has omega-6. So including pasture-fed, or in this case grass-fed, they call it, it's a trade name, grass milk is going to help correct a dietary deficiency of omega-3 fats and help regress the balance. American study here. My PhD student, Hannah over here, was involved last year monitoring some of the PFLA farms, 8 farms that were feeding forage to their diet, and she compared that with milk that was bought at supermarkets, organic and conventional milk. Some respects very different to the American study. On the whole, our milk is better than the Americans. I see even our conventional milk is within the range. But again, we see down here our ratio of higher omega-3 fats to omega-6 fats in the PFLA study down here. And this is the CLA level that are in the milk, so an additional benefit that the organic and then another increment into the pasture-fed milk. Lots of evidence on the beef. I'm not going to have time to go through everything yet. I have prepared, a bit like Zoe, I have got leaflets here with the evidence for pasture-fed meat and milk in terms of composition. The first study that I want to talk about here is the, again, omega-3 to 6 ratio from, this was a review article looking at 6 different studies where in each study they compared pasture-fed and grain-fed meat. And we can see that consistently the grass-fed meat had an omega-3 to 6 rate or 6 to 3 ratio well within the range that we're looking for, as opposed to the grain-fed meat. So the grain, high in omega-6, low in omega-3 resulted in high levels of omega-6 going into the meat. Skip through that one. This is a small study, because you might think, well, what does that omega-3 meat level in the meat mean in terms of our diet and what we're recommended to have? So we talked about nutritional guidelines, maybe quite scathingly, but I've taken those guidelines and thought, what would a single sirloin steak supply to meet those guidelines? So it's 10% of our energy intake coming from saturated fat, and this study has got sirloin steaks bought in the winter and the summer that were bought in supermarkets either as organic or non-organic. And I just want to quickly draw attention to the winter diets, the steak that have been finished in the winter months have an overbalance of saturated fat and not enough of these omega-3 fatty acids, as opposed to over this side of the chart, the organic steak, and I've taken organic maybe as a proxy for grass-fed, but we know from other evidence it's not as good as pasture-fed, and we can see a big difference there. As I say, I'm not going to have time to finish this. If I just quickly run through that, this session is actually going to be continued in the agroecology tent on stand E15. And while I've got the stage, can I just take advantage, those of you that are at the front, I'm involved in a European project looking at pasture-fed meat and the benefits to our health, and it would be really good to know how we ought to be disseminating our information. Small questionnaire, how would you like to tell us about our results? Those at the back won't have them, but if you want, there might be some spare ones at the front. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I invite Zoe to come back, please? And we can have some questions. Where's the mic? Have you got a mic? No, the mic's there.
Oh. Hello? Oh. Hey, right, this is the question. If I sell organic store cattle, 9-10 months old, so they've been, I suppose, pasture bred and, you know, suckling off the suckler cows, they go on to be finished by someone. Does that, how they're going to be finished, I don't know, but does that all, do they become a cereal finished or a grass-fed? Because they've had their first 9-10 months suckling off the cow out in the fields. Do you know what I mean?
Yep. This slide shows exactly that point. This is a study from Portugal where the cattle were they were all reared on their mothers out on some native pasture in Portugal. These are the levels of omega-3 fats, short-chain omega-3 and the essential long-chain omega-3 fats, and the ratio at the top, the 6-to-3 ratio. These ones were reared right through to slaughter on pasture. These ones were weaned and went into a shed, intensively fed. These ones were intensively fed for 4 months and for 2 months. And you can see the difference that it had. It's diminishing all the time. So really they need to be fed pasture right through to slaughter in order to get the benefit through into our food. With silage, we lose a lot of the benefits of, sorry, I'll come round to them, I'll use this one. We lose a lot of the benefits of fresh forage from grazing. Grazing is by far the best way to improve our meat quality or milk quality, but silage is going to result in higher levels of omega-3 than, say, grain feeding, or even, well, I'm saying silage. Maize silage is high in omega-6. Maize is high in omega-6 as opposed to grass and clover that's high in omega-3. There's also a difference if we have silage that's got a lot of clover in it, we tend to get higher levels of omega-3 in our milk and meat than we do if it's just grass. Does that answer? I think the more cereals you put in their diet, the more you will reduce the omega-3 fat in the carcass. So it's proportional, you know. And I accept big cattle, late maturing cattle are not bred to be finished on forage-based diets. That's the challenge. Oh yes, you need some shape to it and some finish because fat is good, but I'm not into the economics of buying and selling cattle, but for human health we want, I suppose you could say then, native cattle that will finish on forage.
Is there any research on the effects of lucerne being fed to cattle? I'm not aware of any work, but there's lots of work with clover, white clover and red clover, and when you include those forages in the diet, we see a lot more of the unsaturated fat escaping from the rumen, and I'm assuming lucerne will act in the same way, that we'll get higher levels of PUFA going through into the carcass and the milk rather than going on, being lost in the rumen. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Could I have a clarification on the term native cattle, please? What do you mean when you say native to where?
I said native, cattle that will finish on a forage system. That's what I meant. The influence of genetics on the fatty acid profile is much less than the influence of the diet. So it's what you feed them that's important rather than the breed of cattle.
Are you sure? There's anyone more? Thank you.
Is there a possibility, if you buy in stores and then finish them on grass alone, that you can push it back the other way, given that you don't know how they started off on their initial feeding cycle?
Possibly. This is another study that I had lined up that didn't have time to talk about, where this was a study in Northern Ireland, a human intervention study where they fed either, they had cattle and sheep that were fed either grass finishing or cereal finishing for 6 weeks, and they had 6 weeks, and they had 40 individuals that went on to diets either with the grass-fed meat or the cereal-fed meat for 4 weeks, and this is the impact that eating that meat had on the omega-3 fats in their plasma and the platelets. And the green bars that are largely above the line, in all cases, the consumers that ate the grass-fed meat, beef and lamb, saw an increase in the short chain and the long chain omega-3 fats in their plasma and platelets, and those on the cereal diet for 6 weeks saw a decline over the period of 4 weeks that they were feeding it. I don't know what the cattle were fed prior to the 6 weeks at the end when they were grass or cereal fed, but even 6 weeks on cereal following a lifetime on forage had a negative impact on consumers' health. I don't know which way they were prior to that.
In some ways, the markets are incentivizing the wrong thing. If I sell lamb, if I sold lamb at Easter that's been fed on
Yeah.
a lot of it, I sell grass-fed lamb in September, prices gone down again. September lamb is the worst food we can feed.
Yep.
We've got some work to do. So thank you. Thank you. Please can you thank Zoe and Gillian. Come a long way to